for Trade Desk. Now, if you didn't know this, Trade Desk is an enormous ad platform that's actually trying to do something good in the world. It's providing transparency in the open internet. So outside of the walled gardens, how do advertisers navigate safely and commercially? This is no small job. Philippa looks after 118 countries, I believe. So this is massive, but it's built on the foundations of an amazing career. Started at Scoot for 4 years. We'll maybe talk a bit about that. But then the rump of it at Microsoft for 17 years in a wide range of sales, marketing, and commercial roles. Then the brand formerly known as Facebook for 5 years, pre-Meta days. So again, I'm sure that will be fascinating. But Philippa's so much more than that career trajectory. She's an active member of WACL. She's a non-exec for Redgate Software, and also a professor, no less, at Coventry University. I was looking back, and I think you're our second professor after Byron Sharp. So no pressure, Philippa. But more than that, even from knowing Philippa for a while, Philippa has a great perspective on life that will come through. Not least clear on life mission, which many people aren't, but many people want to be. You also love reading, and make me feel so bad because I'm terrible at finding the time to read. And more than anything, you are a very generous soul in every interaction I've had with you. So it's a thrill to have you on the show, Philippa.
Thank you. That's very kind. I'm a bit speechless, and that doesn't happen often.
Well, Philippa, look, absolute pleasure. But let's dive right in, and I want to pick up from where Mark left off, particularly about reading. And you said you're speechless, and so let's go into the reading bit. What are you currently reading at the moment? What's your pick or book you'd recommend?
Oh, that's terrible. I went out for dinner yesterday with some colleagues and friends, and they were going through all of the, how you have like the kind of content boom where everyone's going, have you watched this? Have you streamed this? Have you downloaded that? And they were all talking about all these shows, and I was sitting there going, I don't know how you have time to watch these things, and I feel bad. And I've got this like kind of ongoing list. And they said, well, what are you doing at the moment? And I was like, I'm in between books. So the last book I read, I need to look at where it is on my desk. That might help. No, I haven't got one. That's terrible, isn't it? The last book I read, I can't remember the name of, but it was about the relationship that Prince Edward had with, God, what's her name? The American. And you're not helping me, guys. Anyway, and the analogies between that and what's happening with Harry and Meghan at the moment, which was not an industry book, but I've been really perplexed about what's happening with Harry and Meghan, and I don't know how I feel about it. So I wanted to get some context and some history on that. So that's a nonsense book, or maybe it's not a nonsense book, but it was just interesting for me. The last business book that I keep referring to at the moment, and it's not really my go-to, but it's one that I'm noodling on at the moment, especially after last year, which was really tough for people, was the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And I always looked at that title and thought, I don't like the title because it seems quite negative. But then when you start reading it, it's actually really really useful because it's simplified and it picks on a few things. And the one chapter that I keep coming back to and I keep kind of rereading and relearning is just around trust and the importance of trust in a culture. So I think that's the one I'd, especially in the current environment where loads of companies are really struggling, and I think leadership isn't tested when everything's going well and up and to the right. Leadership is tested when things aren't going so well. And for me, a lot of what needs to happen is trust. So that's what I keep going back to at the moment.
Wonderful.
So I'm just going to do a quick pause so we can do a tiny bit of editing. This happens. We do edit when we think we can make it even better. The first half of your answer you probably didn't think was brilliantly polished.
No.
When you came in and you said the last business book I read, that was fucking awesome.
Yeah.
So what we can do is we can look at, if we started there, it probably just a harder hitting start, and you don't have to worry about you couldn't remember, you know.
Yeah, sorry. I do feel slightly like I was like, maybe I just put Philippa on the spot as the first opener.
It was a hard start, Richie. Come on.
So it's also like pretty transparent. So it's like, oh God, I'm not reading a book at the moment. I feel so bad.
but when you talked about the last business book and 5 dysfunctions and building to trust, that was awesome. So we'll clip at those. So then we can jump. No, let's jump back in. So
I'm going to watch out for you, Richie, now.
Yeah,
that's okay. I'm the hard guy. I'm the bad one. Mark's the good guy here. Let's go with it.
So Philippa, you said last year has been really tough. My sense is that people have come back into 2023 with a bit more sort of energy and spring in their stride. Can you talk about how you're exiting 22 and entering 23?
Yeah, I agree. I think it also depends where you're sitting in the world. So I think many economies last year didn't have such a rocky ride, but definitely in Central Europe, and that's been harder on businesses, and you can see it now coming through in people's earnings calls and like what's going on with like kind of recent announcements. So I think the way we approached it was the most important thing is you're closest to your customers and you're helping them and working out what's going to be useful and valuable for them. So we spent a lot of time doing that and making sure that we were asking like, how can we help? And then I think we pivoted in the last quarter. I didn't want us to experience that year again. I don't think anybody really does. So my focus was really to try and build momentum so that when we were coming into Q1 this year, we were like kind of starting from a very different position and a very different footing. And so really pivoting the message to, instead of how can I help, really like, hey, this is what I've learned and this is what I think you could do. And this is what might help you. So really being much more proactive in like suggestions. That I think that's enormously helped us. We've started this year in such a different position that we were last year. And I've noticed to your point, our customers and like the partners that we work with and all of the holding group agencies are just in a much more positive mindset. It might not be the kind of 40 or 50% growth that everybody would love to see, but at least it's growth, and that's what people are like focusing on. So I think pivoting our messaging and working out how instead of being passive and like how can we help, being more proactive, and what can, like, we've noticed these insights in like kind of your campaigns, what can you, here's what we think you can do better, I think has really like helped that positive spirit. I'm just hoping that other companies can do and approach it the same way.
Wow. Yeah, look, it's fighting so many multiple dynamics at the moment. It's a real complex environment. And I mean, some of the things that, you know, you picked up on before around the role of trust is a good one. And particularly, you know, Mark mentioned the cornerstone of Trade Desk is all around the role of transparency. And I wondered if perhaps, you know, you could give us a little bit more context into how both trust and transparency feed into the Trade Desk proposition. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, so there's the way I look at the Trade Desk is that the core of the company is a buying platform. It's a technology that helps advertisers buy media in a way where they know how their money is being spent and they know what platforms it's being spent on, and they also can trust that the algorithm is going to be looking for the best possible placement of that ad at the best possible price through a bidding technology. But there's another part to the company, which is to do that really well and to build advertisers and agencies trust in giving us their campaigns to run through a technology platform. They also need to know that we're representing an internet and representing publishers and journalists and all of those people that provide placements for adverts. They need to know that we're working with all of them evenly and equally, and we're not doing like deals to say, hey, if you give us more of your inventory, we'll get you a better price. It has to be driven by the algorithm. So the second part of the Trade Desk that a lot of people don't know we do, because we don't make money from it, we're just doing it because we have to do it to like kind of feed our position in the world, is trying to elevate all of the people and the players in the industry. So whether you're a data partner and that you want to provide and add third-party data to somebody's first-party data, what people want to know is my data going to be in areas that are safe? Is that going to be used in a way that is compliant with GDPR? And am I going to be able to look after my customers' data and make sure that I'm not exposing them or myself to people using it for the wrong reasons? So we work really hard with data providers to make sure that we provide environments like that where they can add their data to advertisers' data, and it's completely transparent. They can see exactly what's happening in the supply chain all the way through. Another example would be with like SSPs or aggregators of inventory. Those guys provide us with inventory, but we need to know that not only are we working with them directly and they're providing us with inventory that hasn't got fixed prices or deals around it, but we're also working directly with the publishers and we're not duplicating any of those that inventory source. So I'm going down into quite a lot of detail because unfortunately ad tech is detailed, but our job is to provide the best possible technology. But to be able to do that, we also have to have the best possible and the cleanest relationships. And everyone needs to see where somebody plays a role in that food chain. And so we're working really hard to do that. And the biggest threat to the industry at the moment is the cookies going away, which has been, really a sticky plaster of a solution for the industry that none of us knew how to resolve. So in one sense, Google kind of removing and depreciating cookies is a really good thing because it's forcing everyone to go, okay, well, how do we target people in a responsible way where they're aware of what permissions they're giving and how they want to interact with the advertiser. And in another sense, we've got to find a solution that everyone buys into as an industry so that we've got kind of a universal currency that people trust. So something that we've developed in the US and now in EMEA is like unified ID. We don't make money from it. We've provided it as open source software. We've given that to the likes of IAB and their tech groups. And we've said hey, this is the solution that we think complies with all of the regulators' asks. And we're trying to encourage people to adopt that so that as an industry, we have a solution that everybody buys into. There's a few other ID providers that are doing similar things. They're basing it on different technology that we don't think is as reliable. And I don't mean the build of the technology, but actually the identifier. They might be using it on probabilistic IDs rather than actually email addresses that is owned by an individual. And so we're just trying our best to provide that solution to the market and then encourage as many people to look at it, review it, definitely give us feedback if it's not complying to some of the regulations, and help us develop that so that becomes a common currency for the whole industry.
Sounds good. It's amazing what Trade Desk has created, actually. It's just somebody the other day saying, super impressive what's been created. The bit that blows my mind a bit, Philippa, in terms of your role is 118 markets. How the heck do you keep your arms around?
Well, that's not, we're not physically present in all of those markets, for sure. But we are physically present in 9 countries today. But how people attract and advertise, you don't need to be in those markets to represent those publishers. So we have relationships across all of the major publishers that then create the inventory or create the content solutions that then you can advertise and attract and kind of market to those customers. But yeah, 118, I think it changes also depending on kind of where the boundaries are set and all that sort of thing. But so you make it sound really grand, but we're in kind of Central Europe, we're in Middle East. We're not physically actually in Africa yet. It's a big continent, very nuanced in how it works. So there's some work to do there. But so I don't like, it sounds be amazing, wouldn't it, if you could travel to all of those countries and learn all about those cultures every day, but I don't. But we do have really good and trusting relationships with publishers that do cover all of those countries.
Oh, wonderful. Philippa, I want to turn a little bit towards your career. And clearly it's been encompassed as being a phenomenal tech-based career, right? Microsoft into Meta and now Trade Desk. I mean, is that how you see it? I mean, and how did you choose it? Did you choose it? Did you get in? And how did you get into, get into this sort of specialism?
Well, like everybody that I've interviewed as well, no, I didn't go out of my way to become a kind of tech person. I used to watch the 6 o'clock news with my parents, and Kate Adie was on, and she was doing all of these amazing like stories. And I remember sitting down and on the floor and going, I really want to be that kind of journalist. I was dreadfully dyslexic, although in those days it never really got like diagnosed. So actually all I thought I was, and all I was told by school, was that I was slow and I couldn't spell for toffee. And somehow, like, kind of, I had an opportunity to go and live in India for a bit, and I did that before I went off to university. I think my mum was really worried that I just wouldn't go to university because I didn't have such a great academic career. And so while I was out there, I got my A-level results. They weren't brilliant, like they were okay. And she like applied to all of these universities and went through clearinghouses and God knows what, and then said, oh, I've got you an opportunity, and are you going to come home now? So anyway, cut a long story short, came home, went to Coventry and Warwick University, started in a journalistic course within a year, and it's taken me this long to know that it was a good thing that my lecturer said this, but within a year my lecturer said, you're never going to make it in journalism. You'll at best be and finally on the 6 o'clock news, like, a cat went up the tree to save a duck. And he said, you just don't have a negative or a cynical way of thinking. And if you don't have that kind of critical way of looking at the world, you're not going to find the stories that we need you to find. And anyway, at the time, I was definitely not impressed with that feedback. I wasn't old enough to deal with it. But I looked at other courses that I could do, and marketing seemed like a good course. So it had more creativity. It had a lot more positive people around it. I liked the ideation part of it. When I met the other students that were doing it, they were much more like kind of my kind of people. So I switched courses, and I did marketing communications. And then at the end of that course, in my final year, the internet just started to bubble around, and I decided that I would write my dissertation in HTML and I'd publish it, because I was writing a theory on how it would be much easier for small businesses to set up and to interact with their customers through the internet. So I thought I was doing something really smart. I had my little kind of Apple Cube. I had a floppy disk. I was writing on this. I was teaching myself HTML and writing it in dissertation. Anyway, handed it in. And as my brother still kindly says, I got a Desmond, which is a 2-2, and I got some feedback saying the internet is for academia and porn only. This is a rubbish theory. So interestingly, I've never consciously done this, but then my entire career has been about proving that wrong. I just wanted to show to people that the internet can be an amazing opportunity and a force for good. And I've been really passionate about that ever since. So even like when I left university and I started looking around for jobs, and I was applying for, jobs like you used to when you through the newspapers and saw job adverts, I applied for loads of jobs. I got a couple of student placement, like kind of fast track placements in big companies. And whilst that was very compelling, the job I actually ended up taking was I was interviewed by two founders in a service station on the M40 on the way to Oxford, and they said, we're going to start this thing called, like, well, at the time it was 3 pages. We're going to prove that the Yellow Pages is out of date and that everything's going to be an online directory. And as soon as they said that to me, I was like, I'm in. I'm there. I'm doing it. Like, kind of, where do I sign? And my dad was going, no, take the job in Marconi. And I was like, no, I'm going to join these two. So that has been a thread that's followed me throughout my career. It's just like, I know the internet can be a force for good and has the potential to be more of a force for good than a force for bad. And so I'm always I'm going to prove that it can be used for goodness.
Wonderful. And of course, Philippa, you're talking to your life mission, and it's brilliant to see how you played that out. Just to bank a couple of things, you're not cynical enough to be a journalist. I think that's a great thing to hear. But of course, at the time, it might have crashed your dreams. But that's a good thing, really, frankly.
No,
and then and the internet is for academia and porn. My word. But again, there spawned your life mission. I wanted to just check in on the dyslexia thing. So it's we've had a number of guests talk to this. It's pretty rife in my family. I've campaigned around neurodiversity. Can you draw a straight line or even a dotted line between what you've gone on to achieve and that as in some way a superpower?
I don't know if I can draw a straight line. There's definitely some things that I can see now, especially in my stepson, who is also dyslexic and was diagnosed quite early. I was in the gang of people that were saying, "Oh my God, I don't want him to get a label." And then him use that label as an excuse for why he just can't be bothered to do something. And I was definitely in that gang, because it was like, well, because I didn't have a label, I didn't have anything I just thought, I'm going to have to work harder, I'm going to have to read more, I'm going to have to write more. So I don't know if I can draw it, but what it has done is, I think it's forced me. I'm quite an introverted person, even though people meet me and they go, "Oh, you're so bubbly," and and it's like I am. But I also, when I need energy, I need to be on my own or with my horses, or like I just need space without interruption, without people. So it's forced me to learn how to manage my energy, I think, and be more conscious of that. It's definitely forced me to become more of an extrovert and be, curious and ask questions, and like, basically because I had to distract the teachers from always criticizing why I couldn't spell. So I'd engage them in conversation, and I see like my stepson doing that now brilliantly. He's like, it's not, don't look here, look over here, look and so he's now charming, and everyone's like, oh, isn't he sociable, and isn't he amazing, and like he's got really good people skills. And so I think there's something around dyslexia, and it forces different parts of your brain to engage, because you have to. I've learned to be more confident. Like if someone's criticizing my spelling, and they probably did a little bit, the reason why I liked computers was because it was like it found those things for me and corrected them for me. And I used to think, why can't I see that that's spelt wrong? Why don't I see that those vowels are all in the wrong place? I think it does nudge you towards different type of technologies or things that can help, that make life easier. So I think that's probably had an influence as well. But I don't remember it being a conscious decision. I just remember going, oh, I get more energy or get more positive like kind of feedback from doing this, so I'm going to do more of that.
It's quite nice the way that you frame the thought around it. Actually activates different parts of your mind and perhaps personality, and then you start to lean into sort of areas where you say you get more positive affirmation from. And by golly, thank God for Grammarly, because it really is a helpful tool there. Philippa, you've literally worked for some of the organizations that are the envy of most people trying to get into a marketing stroke martech kind of career. And I'm guessing that your mom didn't fill out those applications.
No, I still have to explain to my mum what I do, by the way.
So I'm just a little bit curious as to, how were you able to get yourself into those places and spaces? I mean, were there sort of formal ways through which, you were able to get through, or was it, a consequence of other things, perhaps meeting other people, or what would join us the dots in the ability to get into those amazing companies?
I think anybody will say the same thing. There's always an element of luck. So I was really lucky. Like, I met with these two founders who was starting Free Pages. They had this vision that I really connected with. I wasn't a trained coder, but I'd trained myself and bought that HTML for dummies and Java for dummies, and then gone through and just built web pages and gone, that works, that doesn't work. Luckily, coding, whilst there is parameters on it, they don't give a shit about grammar, and they don't criticize you for how you spell something in it, and it's a logical language. So that really worked for me. And I felt like, it's something I can be good at. And then I think the cornerstone, the luckiest thing I had was at the beginning of my career, instead of going into a grad scheme and learning about big business, I learnt business by building it in a small business. And so one day I'd be building a website, the next day I'll be packaging up a sales proposition, the next day I'll be going out and selling to a plumber in Scotland. Then I was managing a car fleet, and then I was filling in for the receptionist because someone important was coming and there was no one else to do it. In a small business, you learn every single trade. If you're the kind of person that goes out, I'll do it, I'll learn, I want to do that. So I'm a proactive person. I'm not somebody that likes to I like to get my hands dirty, and I like to learn by doing. I'm really kinesthetic, and I think actually that is related to kind of dyslexia in that physical. My memory is enhanced when I've done something physically myself. So not just sports and stuff, but anything outdoorsy and physical, and where I get my hands dirty is something that I retain much better and I learn much quicker. So in a small company, you get the opportunity to do that, and if you're not a complete numpty, you often get given more opportunities and more responsibility quite quickly. So in that time that I was at Free Pages, and then we rebranded to Scoot, and we went through massive growth spurts. We hired and set up call centers, people that I'd never had an experience of how to run and manage and motivate a kind of fairly mundane, moribund job. I kind of built a dev team that built websites for small businesses. We started getting ready to IPO, and so we went through all the things you need to do to get ready for a liquidity event. I learned all of this in the first 5 or 6 years of my career. I think that set me up for amazing opportunities after that, because part of that journey meant that we were getting advice from a Microsoft partner. I was managing that relationship for a while. They then said to me hey, when you do sell, would you be interested in coming to work for Microsoft? I was like, whoa, no, I'm not a big company girl, that wouldn't work for me. And then they said later on, I did my earn out and we sold, and it was a really interesting journey. I went through the first learning of I've built this baby with these other people. I'm very, very passionate about this baby, and now I'm selling it to the person that I was competing with for all of my time. And I was like, how do we can't do it. And I was the only person going, no, we're not selling, we're not to them. And then they were like, but look at the money. and that was one of my biggest milestone learnings, is business isn't black and white. It's like really messy. And anyway, I did the earnout, and the guy from Microsoft said, "Oh, please come and see these guys. We're going to set up this thing called Microsoft. We don't know what it is yet, but just come and meet them and come and spend a couple of days with them in the office." And I did, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't a big company. This is the same as there's two people trying to build something, and they don't really know what it is yet, and they need someone to like fill in the blanks." And I was like, "Oh no, I can do that." So it was very natural when I moved across to Microsoft, because it was through relationships that I knew, but the thread that was pulling me through was this purpose again. It was like, hey, we're trying to build this thing to show that you can get all of this content together, and it's going to be a bit like John Lewis's online, and we're going to aggregate all of these amazing pieces of content, and people are going to come to us because it's all in one house. And I was like, oh, and they were like, and we're going to call it Microsoft Networks. And I was like, but Microsoft doesn't know anything about the internet. And they were like, no, we're going to educate. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So it was, there was familiarity for me. It was like, oh, we're going to prove that the internet's a place for good. We're going to educate a load of people. Now I'm going to learn stack loads because I've never done that before. So like, hey, how can I help? And I think that's how my whole career in technology has been. So Microsoft was like the best paid university I could have ever gone to. I worked with, and still do, but in technology you work with like super smart people. They're not just IQ smart, like they're EQ smart. There's a whole load of intelligences that I've learned through those companies. And I did the same thing at Microsoft. I started at MSN, and we started to build a content. Then we bought Hotmail from Sun, and then we were like, okay, now we're going to be like an email. We're going to provide communication services. Then we built Messenger with the audience. Like we built the primary technology, but then we basically said, what do you guys need out of a messaging platform? And we built that, and like kind of it was a real two-way interaction with our customers. Then I made a massive mistake, because a big customer of Microsoft corporate came to me and said, hey, we want to provide email to our staff, but we want it to be online email. We don't want it to be a downloadable client, because a lot of our staff are transient and they don't have laptops. And we don't want to have to provide all that ton of technology. So we want to provide it so that they can log in from anywhere and just check their emails from anywhere. And bear in mind, this was the day before smartphones and stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, we can do that. We can skin Hotmail and we can make it look like your brand. And then you can have, like, we don't sell licenses because it's free. So you can just then have your, all your staff. And then I got this knock on the door from the UK GM at the time, and he said, like, Philippa, we need to talk. And I was like, that doesn't often happen. So I've either done something really good or really bad, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's going to be bad. So I went over to the Reading campus, and he said, oh, like, how's it going? And I was like, yeah, like, communication services, we've got millions of people using them. We're number one in most countries across Europe, blah blah blah. He was like, oh yeah, and like, you were dealing with the Royal Mail recently, and like that's a big customer of ours. And I was like, yeah, like we've done this amazing solution, we've skinned it for them. And he was like, yeah, that's one of our biggest enterprise accounts, and they've just closed down their office deal with us because they don't need it anymore. And I was like, right, totally unprepared. And bless him, like, he could have quite easily gone like, get your coat. He didn't. He was like, well, why do you think that's happened? And I said, because that's what customers want. And like, I thought I was doing the right thing because the customer wanted that and I could do it, and it's really not expensive. And instead of, I'm sure a lot of companies, you'd have been handed your P60. He said, right, I need you to come over and work on the commercial team, because we need to know how to run subscription services, and we need to change the way our business model works. We can't carry on selling enterprise licenses our whole life. So come and join the dark side. So I went across to the commercial side of the business, and I spent another 8 years doing exactly the same thing, learning, putting my hand up, saying, how can I help? Where can I make a difference, like working in different countries, like learning how Microsoft Corp made money out of enterprise licenses, and then helped move them across to more of a subscription and advertising based model, which I loved. Every single minute of it, I loved it.
You've done some seriously cool things, like at the foundation stage of many cool things. So it wasn't a mistake for the post office. It may have felt like it, but it was a game changer for the business. And just everything you've just said in the last few minutes is a massive advert for perhaps putting your ego to one side, as if you're coming into the working world, and not seek the big company. Because in the small company, you have that vertical learning curve, and it set you up with the attributes and mindset that you've then applied in much bigger spaces. But you have to kind of do it that way around, learn that mindset small. So my follow-up question is, it's interesting you talk about making mistakes and some of the feedback you had. You are okay with vulnerability. It's quite a disarming, powerful thing when you're vulnerable. And some people struggle with that. So I'm interested to know when you think your vulnerability has helped to unlock something for you or a business.
I think it does all the time. I never assume that I know better than other people on anything. And I love learning. So where I start is always from a point of curiosity. I think maybe when I was a lot younger, like I thought success looked like, you had a penthouse apartment in New York and you could see like down on all these lights, and it was like in the films or the movies. So it's not like, I understand that there's some people that think that way, because I'm sure I had those thoughts, but I really enjoy working with people, and I feel like I've learned just as much about me working with people than I have about business. And without people, there's very few businesses that can operate without individuals, without people. And when I look back, and I guess this has been like accumulative, when I look back on what I've enjoyed most, what I've learned most, when I've been happiest, when I feel like I've been most impactful, I always remember the people and what people said to me, or the impact they had on me, or hopefully the impact I've had on them. What I'm proud of now is how many individuals still come to me and either ask me questions, or like, hey, can I chew things through with you, or hey, I think you might have a different perspective on this, can I run it by you, or just simply like, hey, thank you, you were really kind to me and that really helped in that time. I look back on and I reflect on more than I do, I worked for that big brand, or we launched that major product, or that's the bit that I remember most. And so I'm pretty sure when I'm on my deathbed, that's probably the things that are going to go through my head, and not that, I worked for a fancy brand, or I had this really fancy title.
You said so many things there that resonate. I mean, the thought around success being the New York skyline versus actually potentially what it really truly is about, which is the people that you affect and impact. That's really, really powerful. And I know we're coming to the end of the segment, so perhaps this be the last question. But then if you then look forward, given the fact that you've probably overcome the need and desire to get your New York penthouse, what do you see in the future as being your success, or the legacy that you would like to kind of sort of leave behind?
That scared me just then a little bit. Like, legacy sounds like something like you're on the end of something. You know what? I never had grandeur. Like, you know, when you're working and building teams and coaching individuals and working on their development plans with them, and there are some people who like present you a 5-year plan and they've almost like kind of got it down to the day, and like you're sitting there going, I'm so pleased with you, you know this so much. And then there are some people that like resist it so much and really hate even the question of like, what do you want to do next? And I've always been a real firm believer that it doesn't really matter what your plan is, like kind of as long as you've got an idea of some of the experiences that you want to get, and you can share those, then like other people can help you, but they can't help you if they don't know the kind of things that you want to experience, or the kind of development areas, or jobs that you want to try. And it doesn't have to be a job so much as a project or something. So I've practiced that with everybody I've worked with, and so I've never said like, oh, I want to be Mother Teresa, I want to come up with something that's so fundamental that everyone will remember it, and then they write books and things about it. I don't think I'm that person. I do think I'm somebody that everything I touch, I just want it to make it a little bit better. And to everybody I work with, I just want to make sure that they've got the best out of life while I've had an influence. And so I think, and I hope that my legacy is going to be that, which is like, I've just made things better for people. And that's kind of all I want to do.
How wonderful. It's, you come across as being such a genuine person who really just wants to help in the most kind way. So this is the segment where Philippa, I try and summarize some of the key elements, and there are just so many. But let me see if I can do my best here. And I think the best starting place and position really, is a consequence of your mission. And in fact, the thought around the internet being for academics and for porn is well and truly busted, I'm sure, today. And, your contribution around thinking about how we can make the internet a place for good and, of course, expansive is probably where, your life's journey has been. And I think that's remarkable. But they always do say that from small acorns lead into big oak trees. And I think just that moment in the gas station where you took a chance on those two guys instinctively, which then had a monumental shape and impact on your direction, is really both brave as well as inspiring. So small business, and you said the skills that you learned in small business versus, the big corporate entity. I think you're absolutely spot on. In fact, I always reflect on my learnings around business really did start when I started my own, and you had to do absolutely everything. So I totally get that. But the intersection that you then took, leading on to the big oak trees, was actually too remarkable and all part of your journey and your pathway, whether it's engaging with them as clients, but then eventually having to, become part of the behemoth, as they would say. But the life lesson through that being that business is messy, I think is actually quite profound, and one that potentially people don't truly recognize, certainly from the outset, that there's so many twists and turns. And in many ways, that's what this show encapsulates. So thank you for sharing that. Leading up to perhaps key lessons of failure, or could have been potential failure, around that account that you described. So business is truly messy with rounds and ups and downs. But actually, when you have great leadership, it means that you can actually evolve as opposed to get your coat. And I think that's true testament. And I'm sure if you're in that position with other people today, you must always recall that moment that you had, and benefit from that experience. So the last thing I would say, and clearly, going back to some of the skills you've learned and the fights that you've had with dyslexia and trying to reconcile that in your mind and how you've dealt with that, right through to the way that you've seen success and what success it means to you, not that New York penthouse anymore, which I think is absolutely spot on in the grand scheme of things, and it's all about people, is just absolutely where I think life comes full circle. So there we go. That's my encapsulation of some of those key elements. It's just been an absolute pleasure to hear both your life story, some of your anecdotes, some of your key lessons and themes, and your insights, Philippa. So thank you.
Oh,
It's been really, really kind.
You've just summarised my life. That's like, oh, I'm finished now.
Just beginning. Thank you very much, Philippa. Brilliant.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.